Hello, good evening, and welcome to Upfront. My name is Raymond Dakwa. This is actually part 2 of our conversation with the former Deputy Bank of Ghana Governor, Dr. Johnson Asiama. In our first part, we dealt mostly with the Mensgold saga. And in this second part, we're seeking to establish exactly what were the contributions of the previous central bank to the collapse of banks. Let's not forget, UT Capital started this conversation. 5 more followed. Then it became a bank on its own under the Consolidated Bank. Now, we had a new set that had to go through some other modes. Now, a Ghana Amalgamated Trust was put together to take care of the rest of these groupings. Indeed, for Heritage Bank, it was added to the banks that had collapsed under the CBG's forum. We're seeking to establish whether we could have avoided this in the first place, as has been said consistently by the current leadership of the central bank, and whether there was deliberate and willful negligence on the side of previous leadership of this country at the central bank to let all of this happen. Doc, you're welcome back.
Thank you, Raymond.
And okay, I must commend your forbearance, but this is an issue that's important too.
Okay.
Now, let's get this straight. I'm sure you've heard the accusations.
Yeah.
We've heard in all forms that until the current leadership came to the central bank, it was completely a messed up area. Indeed, it was being deemed that the banking supervision virtually supervised rot in these banks. They couldn't see it, they were conniving. There is a time we were told in this country that even some amount of money, which was meant as liquidity support to these banks, in the case of Capital Bank, got back into the central bank in some form of way that people were given this amount of money. First, what happened to UT and Capital?
You know, first of all, on those allegations,
yes.
you know, I wasn't in office at the time, and so I can't speak to it. Whether the banking supervision staff were engaged in anything,
okay.
We dealt with evidence.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
It wasn't the case that any evidence was brought to my attention and nothing was done. No.
Okay.
You're asking what happened to Capital
and UT Bank.
And UT Bank. You see, when I came in, and again from April 2016, we knew about the troubles there. It was, again, a governance, corporate governance problem, which we were trying to resolve. And I remember at a point, we wanted to send an advisor there. However, the bank came to us and said, look, we know we have a problem. Our shareholders have assured us that they will bring in some capital, blah, 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 blah. And, but we think that the moment you appoint an advisor, it will go, across the whole industry, and that in itself will hurt us. So in place, they said, okay, why don't you just leave it to the head of banking supervision to keep a regular eye on us and a watchful eye for that matter. With hindsight, probably we shouldn't have agreed. We
really?
Should have sent exactly. I mean, based on some of the things I'm hearing now, it's news to me. It's entirely news to me. But
related party transactions.
Exactly.
Exceeding single obligor limited. In fact, to be fair, the central bank also, according to reports on these banks, gave them leeway to exceed some of their single obligor limited.
Well, I did not do anything of the sort.
Not at all.
And you see, that issue too, you have to be careful because some of those waivers can be explained, especially when it comes to transactions that involve energy.
Okay.
If you don't waive it, if, for example, there are somebody is bringing in oil, refined oil, and you don't want to see queues develop at the pump, at the pumps, and the bank comes to you and says, we want to do this LC, however, that will breach our single obligor. Now, if you say no, don't do it, what will happen? The following morning, there will be queues all over Accra.
Oh, that's true.
And the same government will call you and say, my brother, what are you doing? So there's been cases of such waivers, etc., which again was part of the reason, the need for, a recapitalization. Because if they had big capital, then they could, operate within the constraints. So some of those issues I think should be taken one after the other.
I get you.
There are specifics involved.
Yeah, I get your point. Now,
but I was coming
the regime about.
Now I was coming to Capital and UT. So you were asking about that. For me, something happened around August, September 2016. When Republic Bank of Trinidad and Tobago came in, they had a meeting with us and said, look, they wanted to purchase UT and Republic Bank.
Okay.
They had actually brought somebody to do due diligence on UT. So they wanted to send him also to Capital Bank so they can take the two, which they can later on add to HFC. So, and I was happy because it was like, wow, finally there's a private sector solution, coming up. So we better work with these people. And I remember we called the shareholders of Capital. We said, look, these guys are in town. They're coming to talk to you. So please open your doors to them, whatever it requires. Strike a price, because in my view, once that is done, we wouldn't have to, go through a liquidation.
Use the space money.
Use taxpayers' money, issue bonds, etc. That would have been avoided. Unfortunately, I think that thing was just before the elections or so. So somehow the due diligence was not done. And then I remember, even after the change, in leadership, Republic Bank continued with their interest. As a matter of fact, they competed with GCB.
I see.
To take over the two banks. Just that Republic lost out on some grounds. Government felt that, Republic Bank, if they took over, they were going to lay off, a lot of people.
Workers.
Exactly.
But eventually, there are people who were laid off,
exactly, that's my argument. And so that's why I'm asking, wouldn't it have been better if we went for a private sector solution rather than anytime a bank has to go down, use private sector, use taxpayers' money? There are other approaches of resolution. And again, that has to be guided by the cost, least cost, etc.
The rules of liquidity challenges were also liquidity challenges that the bank supported, and he also gave support in that area, liquidity support of 620 or so million for Capital Bank. In fact, one of the things that the Boulders report highlighted was the use of this liquidity support. It was insisting that it was shocking the central bank did not supervise this particular use of the liquidity support.
Don't forget that other banks also, took liquidity support.
Yes.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
So the question is, why is it that it's only the Ghanaian banks that abused it? There has been a practice for years, decades, where how this thing is administered. Is that okay? Now, as I said, the pricing of the support is very high. It's priced above, I think it's about 1% above the policy rate or something.
Yeah.
And so if you borrow money at that rate, there's no way you can trade it in the bank market.
So it's supposed to demotivate you from doing that.
By design, the interest rate alone was expected to take out any such, intimidation, prospects, or to try and play around with the money.
Okay.
That is it. That was the design that has worked.
Okay.
Other banks took it, and within 90 days, they paid back.
They're done.
So the question is, why did those people do what they did? Again, from the reports, I haven't seen the Builders report, but one of the allegations is that some of them have set up, piggy banks, and were using PAT to apply for,
a new license.
And I said, but excuse my words, then those guys were stupid. Because if you take borrowed money to start a bank, there's no way you can operate that bank. Do you know why I'm saying that?
No.
Banking by its nature, from day one, by experience, it takes about 3 years for any bank to start breaking even.
Yeah.
Which means that if you start operating a bank from day one, you'll be making losses for the next, at least 3 years before you move into surplus. Okay. The reason being that from day one, there are all these fixed costs. You need almost the full complement of staff, the software, all that. It involves a huge outlay. Now, by then, you are not attracting deposits. Is that okay? You don't have any depositor. And as a matter of fact, even before they open their doors, before they launch, we demand that for about 6 months they should have been working, but they don't open their doors. So you would have recruited all this staff and everything.
And be paying them.
Exactly. You have to be paying salaries during that time, whereas you haven't even opened your doors to the public. So you are incurring costs, but then no revenues. So that will go on when you open your doors, the depositors begin to trickle in. So that also takes a while. But on average, by the second year, you would have started building your mass of depositors, your business would have been growing up. So hopefully by the third year, you're able to get enough revenues to cover your cost. Is that okay? Now, this is based on the assumption that you are using your own capital. So within that 3 years, it is actually your capital you're supposed to be using.
I see.
Which is free money because it's your money. So think about a case where somebody went and lied to me, the regulator and he's actually went to borrow money at high interest rate, what happens to the interest cost on what he borrowed? So that will mean that instead of breaking even in 3 years, it might take him 6, 7 years.
Longer period for you to do so.
And I'm asking, how do you go into a business where you accumulate losses for the next 6 or 7 years?
The other accusation.
So I am not sure whether they knew what they were doing. And excuse me my words.
These are seasoned bankers too.
If that is true.
These are seasoned bankers too.
Well,
they're seasoned bankers.
Yeah. I mean, if it is true, I don't know. Maybe somebody says probably they took tramadol or something.
Okay.
And so that's why for me, when I heard the story, I said, but for me, even if I heard it,
it sounded strange.
After I told them that it's crazy. I mean, why would you do such a thing? You are not outsmarting the regulator. You are actually being stupid. Because it's like an aeroplane that has taken off.
Takes some time to
It takes some time to stabilize. So if you don't have what it takes to keep going, you will drop. You will certainly collapse. You know, so you notice that those banks that are alleged to have done that, they themselves went to the central bank
again
to ask for assistance, forgetting that central bank assistance will still be at high interest rates. So even if they gave you, it will not help you. So I don't know who advised them.
Was it foreseeable that they would do that?
It wasn't foreseeable, like I'm saying, because over the years we haven't had such a situation. And like I'm saying,
did the regulatory institutions like yourself at the central bank trust that the banks will do what is right all the time?
Yeah, and again, before I answer that question, remember that because of the crisis we had across the industry, and I told you about the doom saw and the fallout, the vulnerabilities across, there was liquidity, challenges across the industry. There was a time we had as many as, I don't remember that data, but we had as many as about 12 banks that were, on that support system.
Oh, I see.
None of them, those other ones, and you notice that they were, largely, non-Ghanaian. They never abused it. And like I'm saying, the interest rate, is designed. Exactly, that must be deterrent enough. Because those monies are big monies. These are large-scale funds.
Okay.
So the only way you can do business with them will be interbank trading.
I see.
So if the interest rate I give you is already higher than what is in the interbank market, how are you going to turn it around? So I don't know what crossed their mind to say they are playing smart to go and apply for. You can't operate that business.
There's another accusation. The accusation straight lies at the point where is it 20 million or 29 million was said to have been given to central bank was for promotion. In the case of Capital Bank. And the accusation is that it went straight back to the central bank.
I don't have
given
evidence.
To specific people in the place.
I don't have any evidence.
Is it possible?
It's, for me, if you say you gave somebody 29 million, if you know what 29 million looks like, if we want to pack 29 million into sacks, and Ghana must go sacks, it will take about, at least about the size of this room, about 4 times the size of this room.
That's true.
So it's not something you can just carry and then go and give to somebody.
But they don't take the money. They actually deposit it in accounts. They can share it around.
If they deposited it, we'll see it. It will show up in the records.
So that cannot be true.
Again, I don't have the facts.
Yeah, but
and so I cannot make category. But then I doubt very much if that was the case.
And during your tenure,
because let me tell you, one of the, well, maybe I should leave that because it came up at Yoko, so it's not somebody I can talk about.
But the question I'm asking is
those allegations.
They say because of
just
issues
wild.
like this, that's why the central bank was quite laid back, was laissez-faire with proper scrutiny of these banks.
But if the central bank was laid back, how can we begin to take steps, to make it possible for resolution?
Okay.
And the basic question I keep asking is, if Act 930 wasn't done by us in the second half of 930, there was no way the central bank will have any powers to close any bank this year.
Really?
So can't you give us credit for that alone?
I see. Now,
So there were some building blocks. There were some steps taken. As I mentioned to you, there was a roadmap we were working on. All that it required was solve the liquidity problems of the industry, and that would have meant raise, some tax, special financial sector tax or something, use it to pay off the exposures, bank exposures to the energy sector, SOEs, BDCs, etc. And then, the recapitalization thing also, bring it in.
Was it all paid?
What is it?
Was it all paid? All the exposures? Was it
well, a new administration came in, and that is why they set up the ESLA PLC, etc. to try and do it. But you know that they couldn't raise the money that was needed for that purpose.
That's true.
So some attempt was made. But I still think that if we had come in and then we just raise additional taxes to take care of that. That I think would have helped.
Okay, now one more thing.
We needed to be sure of banks that were genuinely having liquidity problems because of those issues, and then also banks that were actually mismanaging their affairs.
The treatment of politically exposed persons. Indeed, part of the Bolters report suggests that the central bank was willing to turn the other way when it came to politically exposed persons, exceeding single obligor limits and all of that.
Have you seen the Bolters report?
Yes.
I haven't seen it.
Really?
Can you do me a favor? Give me a copy.
I'll get you a copy of the report.
I have asked for it everywhere. But
I'll get you a copy of the report. That's interesting.
I can't.
But was this foreseeable that the bank would turn the other way just because the person is a politically exposed person and get them to exceed the single obligor limit?
No, I'm saying that if the single obligor limit thing had to do with a transaction in the energy sector,
okay,
then treat it differently.
Oh, okay.
Because those ones were treated.
Were they the only different places that were given the bypass?
Well, there may be some others, but then I need to see the details.
Okay, I get you.
Is that okay?
For example,
so if it is something to do with, for example, that an LC that has to be done for crude oil to be delivered in Tema, that one, don't go there because it becomes a political issue. If you don't waive it, you'll get a call from government.
How about building a cement factory?
So that's the more reason why we had the recapitalization issue. You know, because once banks carry adequate capital, then the single obligor thing, there will be enough room there to accommodate.
How about building a cement factory? Jata Cement, for example, had some of these bypass given them to exceed single obligor. In the case of UT Bank specifically, was that also possibly an area that they could fit in?
I'm not aware of that, the transaction you are related to. I will
because it was very popular. It's the tune of almost 300 million.
When did it occur?
We're talking about 2015 and 2016.
I wasn't in power at the time. I came to power
I know in 2016, but you saw those transactions, right?
I didn't see that because I was a staff. I was just a normal staff. And when you're a normal staff, unless you are working, in that line, you wouldn't have seen it.
Okay.
You did have said it. But I'm just stating that in some strategic cases where it is of national interest, for example, if you don't do the waiver, certainly by this evening you see there's a fuel shortage all over the country. And then line queues everywhere. I mean, no government will sit down for that to happen.
Okay.
So that was one of the motivations why we said, no, we have to get banks to recapitalize. And so it was done. So the specific cases have to be considered. You are talking about Jata Cement. Maybe somebody else has to answer that question because I don't recall that transaction. I don't have the details, so it's better not to get into that. If it was seen as a strategic something,
it could have been allowed.
Probably, but I don't have the context, so I'm not speaking for or against it.
Yes,
I'm just saying
my attention has been drawn to the fact that that matter is actually before court too.
So we must be careful.
Yes, I get your point. I understand that. I appreciate that.
Okay.
Now, this is UT and Capital Bank.
Yes.
The claim that was also gone around was that central bankers, like your very good self, were virtually taking money from these banks, even when you give them liquidity support, part of it for yourselves. That's why you couldn't crack the whip.
No, not at all. That's not. Well, I never saw any evidence to that effect.
You never took any money from them.
How would I take money from them?
To make the system not only loose, but also turn a blind eye on regulatory procedures they ought to follow.
No, not at all. That's not possible. That's not possible. And I explained to you the circumstance behind, those liquidity supports.
I get your point.
Now, you see, the context here, let's not forget the context. We came from 2013, 2014, where the energy sector difficulties, the exposures to SOEs, in the energy sector, etc., had impacted on liquidity across banks. Are you understanding?
Yeah, I get you.
So by 2015, there was the resolve that, look, if a bank needs help, because the cost of that liquidity support had to do with the government itself, not so. Because of the under recovery, etc. VRA was not able to settle its debts to some of the banks, etc. Are you understanding?
Yeah.
So if a bank says that I have VRA's debt on my books, they are not able to pay up, I have liquidity problems, I need you people to help me for 90 days. Will you say you will not do that?
No, you can't say you not do that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's not as though the system became loose. It was as a result of those issues that were running as a result of this.
Okay.
Are you understanding?
Yeah, I get you.
If you take Unibank, for example, Unibank minus them, the doomsaw thing would not have ended, probably.
Really?
Yes. Why? Because since the VRA exposure was not being paid, No other bank wanted to, do those LCs anymore. It was only Unibank that did it for them.
So why would they take on such a risk?
Unibank?
Yes.
Well, you can ask them why they went into it. Because for me, I think that was one of the things, that was when the bank really started declining.
All right.
Now, so with that backdrop, and I remember when I came in, I saw, there was evidence that Unibank was reeling out of that.
They were moving out of that situation.
They were suffering from that a lot.
Okay, yeah.
They had done a lot of government-related projects, all these exposures, and I saw that they had as much as about 900 million on government stable, know. And so if you have that idea, this is a bank that is having liquidity problems. They have over 900 million on the table of banks. The ESLA payments had just started. And in all, through ESLA, they were going to receive around 330 million cedis. If that bank asks you for a 90-day transition help, and you know very well that if we don't grant this, the interbank market will only get heated up. Okay. And in a matter of time, this bank will go down. You understand it? And don't forget, Unibank at that time was the largest local bank. So issues about let's liquidate them, let's resolve them, it really wasn't
on the table.
On the table, at least as far as I was concerned. What we were doing, but we knew that there were corporate governance issues there that we needed to address.
You knew that?
Yes. And we started work on the corporate governance directive.
Were they addressed?
Sorry?
Were they addressed? Did you take steps?
The directive was not completed until a new government came in.
Oh, so without a directive, you could have gone in there?
No, there has to be, rules that says that, what is it? There's this specific tenure for MDs. Directors have to be so and so. There has to be rules.
Were there no general guidelines?
There were no general guidelines about tenure. They were just, they were not adequate to fix the corporate governance problem.
So the fit and proper rules were not existent?
No, the fit and proper rule was there.
Yeah.
At the start.
Okay.
Okay, when the president is going to become a director.
Okay.
The fit and proper rules were there. Yeah. But over time, the conduct of directors, etc., their tenure, etc., etc., these needed a different, provision.
I get you.
So we actually started work on the corporate governance, directive.
I see.
We actually completed, sent it to the IMF for their comments, and then the election came.
Oh,
so
okay.
New administration came, and then I think later on those comments came. They put it together, and then it was issued in 2017.
Yeah.
But as I said,
but it's one of the things that they say they are put out there.
The central bank is a continuous organization.
Yeah. I have
so
a question.
There are many things that we started, and then the new guys came and finished, and I'm happy. So when it comes to corporate governance, if you ask my assessment, for example, of the banking reform so far, I'll tell you 2 areas I want to look at. One, governance reforms. I think that the fact that corporate governance directive has been issued, we are good to go. Because some of the difficulties now we can handle. Maybe it's only in terms of the recapitalization and the offshoots. This is the only thing that probably I have some issues with.
Yeah, I'm talking about that because one of the reasons why Beige, Sovereign and Construction Bank were actually collapsed and put into the CBG was because they obtained their licenses under false pretense. And again, the accusation is that these licenses, the preliminary ones, were issued prior to the coming to force of the current leadership of the central bank. And they are insisting that if due diligence were done, these false pretenses could have been corrected.
So again, from where we sit, as leadership, we depend on memos from the banking supervision. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Because to license a bank, there are laid down procedures. So before I put my signature on their certificate, there will be a memo that outlines that each of those checks have been done. Is that okay? And so when I look through and they say we have checked, nothing, blah, 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 that's it. It's good to go. Then I come.
Yeah, fine.
Is that okay? So if our technical people, failed to notice something, yes, it's a systemic failure. But that doesn't mean that there was a deliberate, like people like Omani or Wadia will say, that those licenses were given for benefit. And I'm like, why are people talking this way? Why are people talking this way? These issues, like I'm speaking with you now, all along I've always been saying, if really somebody doesn't understand, call me up. We can have lunch, at least I can educate you on the issues.
I get you.
But to just make up your own story, and then it's like giving a dog a bad name and just paint it, and then, it's unfortunate.
I'll take a break. When I come back from the break, one of the issues we'll deal with is the most recent resolutions.
Okay.
The the banks that have gone into the GAT, the Ghana Amalgamated Trust, whether that's the right decision or not, whether that's also something that's, and also the bigger conversation on minimum capital requirement of 400 million. Really necessary?
Okay.
Was it required?
Okay.
Is it the cause of the problems you are having with these banks? Okay. After the break, we'll continue our front.
Ghana's first and only 24-hour news channel, JoyNews, presents JoyNews Prime, a news bulletin that lets you know all you need to know. Human interest, politics, business, showbiz, and sport. We've got it all covered on JoyNews Prime at 7 p.m. JoyNews Prime is seen right across Ghana, West Africa, and beyond, and in Europe. JoyNews Prime, bringing the news together from all over.
You welcome back to Upfront. My name is Raymond Akwa. My guest today is a former second deputy governor of the Bank of Ghana, Dr. Johnson Asiama. And this is the most important second part that we've been looking out for a very long time. The banking crisis. What really happened? What has been happening over the period? Is the Bank of Ghana's final reform, the ultimate reform to fix all the problems on the state of the banking in this country? That's the question that we're asking. The man who was there has seen it all with the central bank and actually has a proper appreciation of the issues in this case. In any case, he's also been accused of several things when it comes to this central bank. But you're welcome back, Doc.
Thank you.
Now,
Thank you.
we're seeking, of course, we're basically dealt with the CBG issue. Now, was CBG a good idea?
CBG, like I'm saying, you know, there were options. Whether to liquidate, whether to resolve them, whether to use the purchase and assumption approach, etc. There were options. But I think
was the option the best option?
That, wait a minute, the fact that the depositors, you know, more or less, you know, don't have to lose their funds, you know, etc. I think for that reason, I think it's good enough because you want to minimize the disruptions. However, as you know, it comes at a cost because government then has to issue a 5-year bond to backstop
almost 12 billion.
Yes, but
according to the president.
Yes, but you see, again, I think that 12 billion, you know, it doesn't mean that all of that is going to be expended. Okay. Because included in that is the recoveries. You know, for example, the liquidator for Unibank. You know, according to what they are saying, Unibank is supposed to cough up about 5.7 billion, isn't it? Yeah. All that is included in the 12 billion. So as and when these recoveries are made, the amount will
keeps
drop.
Reducing. Okay.
So I think that the propaganda of let's paint such a negative thing in order to crucify somebody, I don't think it helps. It creates unnecessary, you know, anxiety. And like I'm telling you, I have seen a database of assets, you know, that, you know, those people had acquired, and I saw the valuation report on them. So I'm pretty sure that those assets alone, over the next 5 years, we should be able to realize at least 4 billion out of that. Okay. More or less, the 5.7 billion should be able to recover that.
In the Unibank case specifically?
In the Unibank case specifically. And I'm told for UT and the other one, they are also making some recoveries. Yes, they say that they've actually done some recoveries. There were other issues, especially with UT, which we didn't talk about. You know, I was saying that Republic Bank had actually come in, you know, before the elections to try and acquire them, and they continued thereafter. So for me, I didn't think it was going to end up in a liquidation per se. If you remember, just about a month before elections, we gave them some facility.
Yeah, that's true.
You know, I signed that facility and I ensured that it was 100% collateralized. Yes. Really? I have a copy of the memo I signed right here in my bag. I can show you.
Now, do you know why this is interesting?
If it is
the report suggests that even when they had abused the monies we had given them previously, we still give them more.
No. The reason we gave them more is contained in the memo that came from banking supervision, where, you know, we made it clear that anything you give them again has to be 100% secured. And you know what 100% secured means? That is as good as our money. Okay. Is that okay? I mean, if I give you 100 Ghana cedis and I take treasury bills worth 100 Ghana cedis from you, I haven't lost money.
Yeah, because
all I'm saying is that if you don't pay, I'll go and collect it anyway.
That's true.
And for me, it probably made sense at the time because there was this conversation You understand it? Republic Bank had come in, they wanted to take them over. This was like 1 month before the elections. That wasn't a time to close down a bank. So the best you want to see there is that, well, if this is what will help them during this transition period, but in the meantime, whatever we give them should be 100% secure.
I see.
And I remember when the new leadership came, I made it clear to my boss.
You told them this?
I told him. Before I left, I made it clear to him. I said, look, there was some additional facility of 170. Even then it was a tug of war. But then we insisted that it should be fully collateralized, part T-bills and part in terms of placements with other banks. If you talk to the head of BSD, he can give you further details. I have a copy of the memo approved right here, And so for me, if it's 100% collateralized, there's no risk.
I see.
If they turn around and did certain things, then I didn't know. I rely strictly on the word of the head of banking supervision.
Okay.
When we say 100% collateralized, make sure everything is tied in. In case there's any problem, we should be able to recover that money. Job done. I've done it, and I've secured it.
Now,
so it's not as though we threw in something because I don't get it.
Now, the conversation moved to the point where minimum capital requirements were also on its way. The banks had protested. They went to the president. They went to various units. But this 400 million was not changing anytime soon.
Okay.
On hindsight, do you think it was a good idea?
Well, again, I'm not judging anybody. I'm not passing any, I'm just speaking as a Ghanaian. Before they came in, as I told you, there was a roadmap to deal with the problem, liquidity problem, and then the capitalization problem. According to that roadmap, if I recollect, we were going to peg it at 230 million.
Really?
Instead of 400 million. And the reason was that we wanted to avoid disruptions because of the same local banks. Now it didn't stop there. We went ahead and said, okay, let's start the implementation of the ICAP process. ICAP process is called Internal Capital Adequacy Assessment process. What that seeks to do is to ensure that the amount of capital that a bank keeps is just equivalent to its risk profile, on a continuous basis.
I see.
So yes, minimum capital, but beyond that, based on your activity, you adjust the capital levels the appropriate capital levels. We went ahead and asked for technical assistance, and so we had an IMF guy who came and who was working on the capital requirement directive that was issued now. It actually started during our time. It's called Peter. Yes. So Peter was handling both, developing the capital requirement directive alongside the implementation of the ICAP process, etc. So all those things were going on alongside. So if you ask my views, probably, if we had implemented that one, then there wouldn't have been a need for GATT, you understand it, to save the local banks.
So why was...
So that in that case, we would have had some local banks existing alongside the bigger banks, but the solvent ones. As for those ones that said they lied to us to get license and whatnot, they will automatically go out of business. There's no way they could have continued.
The question important at this point is, what influenced this 230 million? Why not the 400 million? Because the banks had complained that the 400 million was too high and that it didn't make sense to them, mindful of where they were coming from 130, to go to 400.
Exactly.
It was a huge jump.
Exactly.
Was that the reason why you chose 230?
Well, we did broad consultations.
Oh, okay.
Broad consultations, yes. On the appropriate level, that would do well. And remember, it's called minimum capital. So minimum really has to be minimum. You understand? And I'm saying it doesn't stop there. Beyond there, you have the ICAP and other, other things to ensure that each bank keeps adequate, capital. I explained to you that it was important banks recapitalize. Why? Because then we wouldn't have to grant waivers on the single obligor and so. So it was good. For us, it was a good thing to get them to recapitalize.
Okay. But not the amount of money that's been...
However, we were not going to peg it that high. Why? Because of the same local banks. But that notwithstanding, although the new guys are using 400 million, the 400 also has its advantages. Like the arguments, if you saw the Moody's report, it's good. It promotes competition, it promotes liquidity, it's likely to lead to a credit explosion. Hopefully interest rate spreads will come down and all that. It's good. I'd love to hear that. But the only thing then, again, is when it comes to the local banks.
That's the question I was about
when
to.
it comes to the local banks.
What is so special about these local banks?
Local banks, based on some research work that was done for us, I think late 2016, showed that it was the local banks that were mainly doing the SME banking in Ghana. It was the local banks that were mainly supporting our SMEs.
Okay.
Yes. And the reason being that, you see, most SMEs, you see, in credit administration, if you take a bank like the big banks, you know, Stanchart and some other ones, their credit operations are located outside Ghana. Do you understand?
I get you.
So if you apply for a loan with them, there's nobody in that bank that you are going to interface with. You are going to talk with to try and explain issues to get that loan. No. It is sent somewhere in India or something, where somebody just takes a checklist. Is it A? If is it B? If not, decline.
They decline, okay.
But in the case of our local banks, there's that interface.
There's the
You understand
humane part of it where
yes, exactly. So
they
even
understand
where
the
the
situation
customer
better.
probably doesn't meet the checklist, they may say, what's the other way? Okay, who is her husband? You know, is he a non-public figure? Is he strong financially? Let's get him to come and guarantee. You know, they find other flexible ways of
To do it.
credit delivery. Why? Because our SMEs, you know them.
But
you
because
know.
the
So
local
it makes
banks
sense
were
if-
deemed to be very fragile.
Yeah, wait a minute. So for me, it made sense to more or less accommodate the local banks. And so that's why I'm happy that at least the GATT is designed in that direction to help the local banks. The only thing is that the structure of the GATT is
When
the
you say
problem.
structure, what do you mean?
The way the use of pension funds and all these arguments.
You think use of pension
2
funds
days
is wrong?
2 days ago, Imani came out with something,
Yeah.
some suggestions which I find to be very, very innovative. And
support that.
I'm sure our technical people at the central bank are looking at it.
So you don't think we should use pension funds because there's been a lot of complaint from the teacher unions and also the other trade union groupings about.
It's about the risk involved.
Okay.
So, you see, we want to do the reforms, complete the reforms, and never have to go to it again.
I see.
And so, if there's no clarity in terms of the returns, and thereby risk involved, then we need to look at it again. So, what I'm saying is, it's good that the independent views are coming on board. These things will be, you know, subjected to, you know, a lot of brainstorming, and I'm sure will come out.
Do you know
But there are other alternatives. There are
do you
other
know those
alternative
behind
ways.
the GATT?
I haven't checked. You know, I'm a pensioner. I mean, why should I bother? Why should I bother going
A
to
pretty
such
much
things?
younger pensioner.
I'm a pensioner.
Yes.
I take my kids to school. I pick them from school.
Interesting.
That is enjoyable enough.
Well, that's interesting to know. But because there are complaints that
Yes.
currently in the system,
Yeah.
if it is indeed the case that this system that's going to run GATT is going to be the case, it will be problematic in the nearest future. Why? Because we are virtually going to have, and let's not forget, ADB and NIB are in the GATT. Some way, somehow, because it's shares that have been bought by these pension funds, if they offload them, it might get back to private hands. And this is basically like privatizing some of these banks.
You know, I wouldn't get into that again because there's a lot of propaganda around it.
Really?
I know there are some people who are talking, but I prefer to listen to the independent, you know, think tanks.
Okay.
So yesterday I was reading the Imani's arguments. It made a lot of sense to me. I'll read it again. And I'm sure that between Bank of Ghana and Minister of Finance, they are listening to the arguments. But personally, given a choice, maybe I would have said, look, let's just go straight away. If it means raising a special tax, you know, and use that to take care of the equity interest in those banks and let probably the Finance Committee of Parliament be the oversight, you know, body over that investment until such a time that we can sell and get off. That could be another, you know, but as to whether it makes sense to raise additional taxes right now directly to finance that equity, I don't know.
The banking sector, has it been cleared? Has it been reformed?
I think
Is
that
it
the
now on
corporate
the sound
governance, the corporate governance, you know, issues for me, I'm happy that it's been done, because as I told you, these are things we began.
Okay.
Is that okay? So it's something that we have begun. It's gone to the end. It's now been passed. It's great.
You don't
So I'm
expect
happy
any
about
other
that.
bank to collapse again?
But before I come back to that,
Yeah.
maybe the only thing that is remaining that probably, if I were conversing with my colleagues, I'll tell them now is, You know, the central bank and its operation operates in a political economy environment.
That's true.
And the way things work is very funny. So there's one more thing we need to fix. That is the licensing conditions for a central bank. If there's a way we can make it so severe, so difficult, that unless otherwise, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
As it exists in other countries. You find other countries that they have only 5 banks. You find that the licensing conditions are so tough, you know, because if you don't come through new license, you still have a way to own a bank.
Yeah.
And that is going through the stock exchange.
I see.
So I would want to say, let's move to the next stage where, you know, anybody who wants to own a bank will have no choice but to go through the stock exchange.
Okay.
You see, because once we fix that problem, then it wouldn't matter who is governor. You understand it? Because then no politician can put any pressure on me. This is the way it is. Okay. Or influence the system. So maybe in terms of the governance issues, that's what I would want to see. That let's strengthen the licensing conditions going forward, and that will greatly help. Appointments
to the central bank, should they be reviewed?
In terms of?
As in who gets to appoint who there, who gets to be relieved of a position in there?
Appointments to the central bank. You know, for now, it's government that appoints.
Yes.
Okay, and disappoints, of course.
Yeah.
As for the manner that is done, for me, that is the only thing I would say. That the manner in which it's done, it should be done nicely. You see, do a debriefing even when one is leaving. You know, do the exits, you know, interviews. Make sure that there's complete, and then there's that communication line that is open all the time, such that you can get feedbacks and the likes. You know, that doesn't take away the opportunity to investigate somebody or blah, blah. It doesn't take it away. But it's only make sure that there's that continuity. Because it's Ghana we are serving. We are not serving a particular political party. We need to get it right. Because when we get it right, ourselves will enjoy.
I've heard lawyer Asan Kuma say that the former people at the Bank of Ghana failed the central bank. Is that a session you agree to?
You know, I remember when we were in primary school, you know, the first teacher will come and teach you something, and then you move on to the next class. And the next class, the new teacher comes and says, were you people taught this thing when you were in the previous class? We say, no. You understand?
Yes.
That's the way I take Asan Kuma's comments.
Yeah.
For me, I really wouldn't want to comment on him. Great guy, very intelligent. But my only appeal is, people like him and the swaying statements they keep making, you know, doesn't help.
I see.
You understand it? If there's a particular issue, take a phone. You understand it? I am prepared. If Ace calls me and says, I need some questions, I need to get understanding, can we have lunch? I need to get your perspective. I'll be there and explain those that I can explain.
His substantive claim is that you didn't do enough.
We didn't do enough is relative. The question is, did we know and didn't do enough? Because like I'm telling you, the issues about connected lending, you know, blah, blah, blah going on. I did not see that evidence.
Never.
I did not. It did not appear in any exam report, you know, that this bank has all these other companies, over 60 companies it's operating with and blah, blah, blah. Nothing of the sort came out. So yes, the question is, why couldn't our people pick it up? And I'm telling you, when I spoke to KPMG, they explained that there were certain things that our examiners ought to have looked at, but they were not looking at.
Is it to do with the capabilities of the staff?
Sorry?
Is it to do with the capabilities of the staff?
Well, you know, the central bank staff are continuously trained. They attend a lot of training programs. As to how this happened, lapses occur all the time. You understand?
You don't think it's deliberate?
It's not. I don't think it's deliberate, unless I have evidence otherwise.
Okay. Because
when I spoke to KPMG, that's the impression I got.
You got that.
So because I really wanted, I was like, is it that they saw it and didn't inform us?
Okay.
And they said, no, it's possible. You know, they were not looking at so and so, you know, ledgers. So now we've told them, if you go to any bank, don't just accept this, but go the extra mile, because that's where you might see, you know, certain things. So for me, the name callings, the crucifying him, the whatnots, I don't know what he seeks to achieve.
If you ask
the single question I'm asking is, he's a lawyer.
Okay.
You need a law to be able to do things.
Yeah.
Now we are resolving banks. Is that okay? Granted, that is good. Who did the law? Was it Asan Kuma who did Act 930?
No, this law was done in 2016.
Exactly. So the fact that a loan was done, you mean it doesn't deserve any credit? If we were sleeping, how did we even, conjecture that, look, we needed to put this in place towards so and so purpose? So some things were done.
Let me ask
but
you
there
this
were
question.
unknowns. Is that okay?
I get you.
There were unknowns, like Donald Rumsfeld would say, there were unknown knowns.
No.
Is that okay?
I get you. But this question is important to me.
Okay.
From hindsight, what you see today, would you have acted different if you were in the central bank?
Not entirely. Not entirely. Because as I told you, some things, have continued.
Okay.
The issuing of the corporate governance guideline, the, how do you call it, capital requirement directive, all those things were started by us. You understand it? So you still would have had those things, coming through, which means that the corporate governance reforms would still have been done successfully. Probably the only thing that would have been different would have been, one, the mode of resolution for some of the banks.
Okay.
Because then I would have been much more particular when it comes to the use of commitment of committing taxpayers' money.
Okay.
Are you understanding?
I get you.
And then secondly, I would be concerned about the level of capitalization to be sure that local banks are not impacted adversely. But now they are. And then we have to bring in GATT now to try and resolve it. Now there are issues about structure of GATT and the like. So these are like, one or two or three things that I would have done, differently. But I'm speaking like a Ghanaian. And as I said, it is friendly fire. I don't want to get a call.
I get you.
Please emphasize it to your listeners.
Okay, I get you.
This is friendly fire.
Okay.
I'm just volunteering. We're just speaking.
Now, let me also clarify this part. If you are made governor, let's say in the next year, after 2020, would you take up the appointment?
I'm 50 years old this year. And as I mentioned...
There's a lot of years ahead.
Well, hopefully, depends on the Almighty.
Yes.
And by the nature of my training, I cannot be an engineer. I cannot be a medical doctor, nothing. Yeah. The only thing I can do is what I was doing.
Okay.
So if the good Lord grants me the strength, and then, as you know, such appointments is based on the governing power.
Yeah.
If there's a governing power, and then my circumstances don't change, if I get another job somewhere and I'm more comfortable, then why bother? You understand it? Instead of having people like Omani Wadi and so forth running you down. So I cannot tell. The future is unknown. Okay,
there's a claim that he made that you have denied in your statement. That claim is you be prepped to be the running mate to John Dramani Mahama, the former president.
Right.
Is it on the table?
First of all, I'm a spiritual person. Yeah. I always say it. I don't believe that. My belief is that even if a door is opened, it doesn't mean you should enter.
I see.
Is that okay? So I don't take decisions just ad hocly. I know there has been all kinds of rumors and calls and whatnot, but let me state categorically that absolutely nothing in that line.
Nobody has approached you?
Nobody has approached me. I don't have any political ambitions. But you've
not heard your name in the grapevine.
Oh, at this level,
yes,
people mention your name.
Okay.
Is that okay? Even with the statement I issued yesterday, I can show you, messages people are sending me saying, oh, they are begging me, oh, I should accept, I should whatnot.
Yes.
But this is Ghanaians for you. Yeah. You understand it? No, however, I need to put it on record. And I'm saying so because...
But if I approach, will you accept it?
I haven't thought about a political career. And I don't think I'm built for that kind of job.
Yeah, Dr. Bawumia too wasn't built for it. In fact, to all intents and purposes, he always says that he was sitting somewhere as a central banker. But when the call is upon you for you to serve the people of this republic.
I think I like functioning as a central bank governor.
Yeah.
Currently, I'm writing my memoirs. And, some of the lessons and some of the issues I've spoken about. Hopefully, for the education of the younger people, that should serve a purpose. But I don't think that call will come up. I sincerely don't think so. I sincerely don't think so. So no politics. I am an economist and a central banker for that matter. I want to remain at that.
My final question to you will be to find out from you. Resolving the Mensgold issue, what should be done?
Resolving the Mensgold issue, as I indicated, is not the only Ponzi scheme on our hands. Yeah. Several of them. They are popping every day. In fact, When I was in office, I introduced something innovative, and I don't know if they still have it there. Why? Because every day there were new ones popping up. You know, in Brong-Ahafo, they call one God is love, God is Satan, all kinds of funny names, you know. And sometimes you wonder why our people are so gullible. So immediately I said, no, we needed some systems at the regional levels. So I said, look, I'm going to recruit for all our regional centers, about 1 or 2 staff. We give them pickups.
Okay.
And all that they have to do is to comb the whole area.
And look for these.
And then, you know, we link them up with the BNI, you know, across the country. And then also the market queens, you know, so that as soon as somebody starts it, you know, they can get that tip off that somebody's starting this, and immediately we can move it and close them. I'm not sure if those people are still out there in the regions working, but if really they are working and working well, then we shouldn't see, you know, new Ponzi schemes, you know, coming up. So those are some of the things I'm telling you, that we did this work, you know, for the good of the country.
I have run out of time, but I want to know, how do we deal with Mensgold? That people want their money. They are insisting that the guys should be brought back into the country to account for it.
Well, I think that is great. But going forward, yes, it's unfortunate, despite the warnings, people have found themselves into this, etc. We need to alleviate the suffering, because I learned from the experience of DKM. And I'll not be surprised that time to go when people see that, oh, it's not likely they'll get anything, we might begin to get some suicides.
Oh, I see.
And my prayer is that we don't lose one soul. You know, the DKM crisis, it's on record that we lost about 50 people. You know, I just hope and pray, you know, that it doesn't happen
So what should government do
ever
now?
again. Now, government doesn't have to directly commit resources to it.
Oh, I see.
I think what government should come now, by now, and I'm sure by now it's happening, we should be able to look for an inventory of assets, you know, of the company. And I think that we should engage the gentleman involved actively. Like I said, when I spoke to them in my office, it wasn't clear that they were just deliberate, you know, to sort of defraud people. It was as though something they stumbled on and then they're excited about. You get the point. And so we should look for that database. You know, I spoke about the database. Get a credible database, you know, on Mensgold. Make copies of that. Secure that database. Because based on that, we'll be able to assess any gaps.
Okay.
You know, for example, if you look at their resources in terms of what they have in the bank accounts, you know, the other real assets that they have, we'll get valuation of those. You know, then we'll be able to assess what gap there is. You know, but at least we should be able to, you know, make sure that up to some limit. In the case of Mensgold, initially we said, let's just try and pay off all the people that have. We should be able to pay all the people that placed less than 3,500. That was our main, you know, target. Because we felt that at least once you take up those people, the suicides will stop.
Okay.
So the same approach is needed here. Quickly assess the resources that they have. And if there are any gaps, begin to discuss what we should do, whether, you know, they should think of based on those resources available, you know. But in all these, a liquidator has to be appointed quickly, you know. So I expect to hear from government quickly. If they are liquidating the company, that a liquidator will be appointed once again to lead the way. Registrar Generals, in my view, did a good job, you know, when we're resolving DKM. And so I hope and pray that probably they will step in again into this one. It can be resolved, at least to minimize, you know, the social consequences. But that said, I might say they don't have a right, you know, to, you know, public resources, blah, blah, no. However, government can help to ease the pain, just as we did with DKM.
Doc, I thank you for your time.
My pleasure.
I'm privileged to have had you here.
My pleasure.
Hopefully, when you are more relaxed, we'll do this conversation sometime again.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, folks, that's where we tied the nice ribbons on the second part of that particular conversation with the former second deputy governor of the Bank of Ghana, Dr. Asiamah. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you.